1. The real Santa Claus. The story of Santa Claus begins long before red suits, flying reindeer, or chimneys became part of the legend. It begins on the warm southern coast of what is now Turkey, in a small 3rd century town called Petra. There, a boy named Nicholas was born into a wealthy family. His parents died when he was still young, leaving him an inheritance that could have allowed him to live comfortably without worry. Instead, Nicholas chose a life of service. He believed that true wealth meant helping others, especially those who had no one else to turn to. When he grew older, Nicholas became the Bishop of Myra, a port city not far from his birthplace. He walked through narrow streets lined with traders, sailors, and families, and he paid close attention to the ones who struggled quietly. His kindness did not come with announcements or praise. He preferred the night when he could move unseen and leave small gifts where they were needed most. One famous story tells of a poor man with 3 daughters and no dowry to offer them. Without help, their futures would have been at risk. Learning of their hardship, Nicholas waited until darkness settled, then slipped a bag of gold through their window. He did the same on 2 other nights, each time without revealing his name. These gestures became whispered tales that spread from one community to another. As the decades passed, stories of Bishop Nicholas traveled beyond Myra's harbor. Sailors carried them across the Mediterranean, merchants repeated them in distant markets, and soon the man became a symbol of generosity. After his death, people across Europe honored him as St. Nicholas, protector of children, sailors, and the poor. His feast day, celebrated on the 6th of December, became a time for small secret gifts, often placed in shoes or left on windowsills. Children waited for the night, imagining a quiet visitor who moved softly and left kindness behind. Centuries later, when Dutch settlers crossed the Atlantic to America, they brought with them the name Santa Claus. Over time, this name transformed into Santa Claus. Literature, poetry, and illustrations reshaped his appearance, giving him a red coat, a round figure, and a sleigh that traveled through winter skies. Though the image changed, the heart of the story remained rooted in those early nights in Myra, when a man chose to give quietly rather than keep his wealth for himself. The modern Santa Claus may seem far from the bishop who walked through ancient stone streets, yet the connection has never disappeared. Both figures carry the same message, that generosity, especially when offered without expectation, can warm even the coldest season. Whether imagined in a small room lit by oil lamps or in a snowy village at the North Pole, the spirit of Nicholas lives on each time a gift is given with kindness at its center. His story endures not because of magic, but because people continue to believe that compassion, when shared freely, has the power to travel across centuries. 2. Cleopatra's real life. Cleopatra VII is often remembered through legends shaped long after her death. Yet the truth of her life is far more compelling than any myth. She was born into the Ptolemaic dynasty, a Greek ruling family that had governed Egypt since the time of Alexander the Great. From childhood, she was surrounded by palace intrigue, shifting alliances, and the constant danger that accompanied the struggle for power. Unlike many rulers of her era, Cleopatra was educated in philosophy, mathematics, politics, and languages. Ancient writers recorded that she could speak with almost anyone in their own tongue, a rare and valuable skill for a queen who governed a diverse kingdom. When Cleopatra was still a teenager, her father died, leaving the throne jointly to her and her younger brother. The arrangement was meant to preserve stability, but it instead created conflict. Advisors around a young boy sought to push Cleopatra aside. She was forced to flee Alexandria, but her exile did not last long. At this moment, Julius Caesar arrived in Egypt, seeking to secure his own position in the wider Roman world. Cleopatra understood that alliances with powerful figures were essential for Egypt's survival. Through careful negotiation and intelligence, she convinced Caesar to support her claim to the throne. Their political partnership became personal, and together they restored her rule. Cleopatra's return to Alexandria was not a triumphant parade, but a delicate balancing act. She had to secure the loyalty of her people while navigating the expectations of Rome, whose influence reached into every corner of the Mediterranean. After Caesar's assassination, she once again found herself in a world filled with uncertainty. Rome fractured into competing factions, and Cleopatra needed to choose which leader could help preserve Egypt's independence. She formed an alliance with Mark Antony, a skilled general who controlled much of the eastern Roman territories. Their relationship flourished both politically and personally, but their union placed them in direct conflict with Octavian, the rising power in Rome. The tension between Antony and Octavian grew into a full war. Cleopatra supported Antony with ships, resources, and soldiers. Their forces met Octavian's fleet at Actium, a decisive battle that ended in defeat for Antony and Cleopatra. They retreated to Alexandria, fully aware that the world they had built was collapsing around them. As Octavian's armies approached, Antony took his own life, believing Cleopatra had already died. The queen, left with no allies and no path to victory, faced a fate she could not accept: capture and humiliation in Rome. Rather than be displayed as a conquered ruler, Cleopatra chose her own end. Ancient sources differ on the method, but all agree that she died by her own decision, bringing closure to a dynasty that had ruled Egypt for nearly 3 centuries. After her death, Egypt became a province of the Roman Empire, marking the end of the Hellenistic age. Cleopatra's legacy has been reshaped countless times. Roman propaganda depicted her as a dangerous seductress, while later storytellers romanticized her life beyond recognition. Yet the historical Cleopatra was neither a temptress nor a helpless queen. She was a skilled strategist, a multilingual diplomat, and a ruler who fought relentlessly to protect her country in a world dominated by foreign powers. Her life was defined by intelligence, resilience, and an unwavering commitment to her kingdom. In the quiet moments of her story, beyond the battles and politics, she stands as one of history's most capable and misunderstood leaders. 3. The Library of Alexandria. The Library of Alexandria began as a dream in the mind of Ptolemy I, one of Alexander the Great's generals who became ruler of Egypt after Alexander's death. He envisioned a sanctuary where the knowledge of every land could be gathered into one place, a center of learning that would stand above all others. His son, Ptolemy II, brought this dream to life. in the bustling port city of Alexandria, where ships arrived from Greece, Persia, India, and the distant coasts of Africa, a great institution was built, the Museion, dedicated to the Muses, with the library at its heart. The scholars of Alexandria were not simply collectors of scrolls. They were mathematicians, astronomers, poets, physicians, and philosophers who lived and worked within the complex. They studied the stars from observatories, mapped the earth, and examined the human body. They compared languages, wrote commentaries on Homer, and attempted to understand the structure of the universe. The library grew through an ambitious and sometimes aggressive policy. Ships that entered the harbor were searched, and any scrolls discovered were copied. The originals were kept for the library, and the copies were returned to the owners. Over generations, the collection became the largest repository of written knowledge in the ancient world. Among the scholars who walked its halls was Eratosthenes, who calculated the circumference of the earth with remarkable accuracy, using only shadows and geometry. Another was Herophilus, a physician who advanced the understanding of anatomy. Callimachus created the first known library catalog, organizing hundreds of thousands of works so scholars could navigate the vast collection. Every discipline was represented, and the library became not only a physical place, but a symbol of human curiosity. The story of the library's destruction is a long and complicated one, far different from the single dramatic fire often imagined. The first major blow came in 48 BCE, during Julius Caesar's civil war. To block the ships of his enemies, Caesar ordered the burning of the Alexandrian fleet. The fire spread to nearby warehouses and docks, damaging parts of the library's collection. Yet the institution continued to function for centuries afterward. Later conflicts, political shifts, and religious tensions contributed to further loss. Under the rule of Emperor Aurelian in the 3rd century, parts of the city were destroyed in battles, and the area housing the library suffered damage. By the 4th century, changes in cultural and religious priorities reduced support for the institution. Subtle neglect, rather than a single catastrophe, gradually dimmed the library's light. No record tells us the exact moment when the final scroll disappeared. It is possible that some of the works survived in smaller libraries within the city or were carried elsewhere by scholars fleeing conflict. What is certain is that the grand vision of a universal library faded quietly, without ceremony, as centuries of work were lost through war, decay, and time. The Library of Alexandria endures today not because its scrolls survived, but because its purpose continues to inspire. It represents the belief that knowledge should be shared freely and preserved carefully. It stands as a reminder of how fragile human understanding can be and how easily wisdom can be lost. When people imagine the vast halls lined with scrolls, the echo of scholars discussing ideas, and a soft sound of pens on papyrus, they are imagining a world that sought to collect the full story of humanity. The dream of Alexandria lives not in its ruins, but in every place where learning is valued above power and where curiosity is allowed to shape the future. 4. The Mystery of Atlantis. The story of Atlantis begins not with explorers or maps, but with the writings of a single man, the Greek philosopher Plato. Around 360 BCE, He described an island civilization of remarkable power and beauty, a place where grand temples rose above the sea and canals surrounded fields rich with harvest. Atlantis, he said, lay beyond the Pillars of Hercules, a term the ancient Greeks used for the Strait of Gibraltar. It was a world wealthy in resources and advanced in organization, governed by kings who were said to be descendants of the god Poseidon. Yet, even in Plato's account, Atlantis was not perfect. As its influence spread, the people became ambitious, confident that their strength placed them above other nations. This arrogance, Plato wrote, angered the gods. Plato explained that Atlantis attempted to conquer parts of the Mediterranean, but their expansion was halted by the Athenians. Soon after, the island suffered earthquakes and floods so severe that it sank beneath the sea in a single day and night. The tale appears in two of his dialogues, the Timaeus and the Critias, where he used Atlantis as a moral lesson, a warning that even the greatest societies can fall when they lose balance between power and virtue. He never presented it as a travel guide or a geographical record. Yet from the moment these texts were rediscovered centuries later, curiosity grew. Scholars debated whether the island might be a real memory of a lost civilization or simply an invented story meant to teach philosophy. Over time, theories multiplied. Some believed Atlantis lay under the Atlantic Ocean. Others suggested it sank near Spain or Morocco. A popular theory linked it to the island of Santorini, which suffered a massive volcanic eruption around 1600 BCE. The disaster destroyed much of the Minoan civilization, a sophisticated culture whose sudden decline has long invited speculation. The eruption was powerful enough to send ash across continents and to reshape the island itself. Because the Minoans were advanced traders with impressive architecture, many wondered whether memories of their downfall could have inspired Plato's description. Still, no evidence connects the two directly. Explorers and enthusiasts continued to search beneath waves and along coastlines. Expeditions used sonar, diving equipment, and satellite imagery, hoping to discover walls, roads, or artifacts on the seafloor. Some claimed success, though none of the findings could be confirmed. As each clue faded or proved unrelated, the mystery of Atlantis grew larger rather than smaller. The idea of a vanished world tugged at imagination, offering the possibility that human history might hold chapters still unread. In truth, the power of Atlantis lies not in whether the island existed, but in what the story represents. Plato's account speaks of a civilization that reached remarkable heights before collapsing under its own ambition. It reflects an ancient belief that societies, like individuals, must remain balanced, guided by wisdom rather than excess. Throughout history, people return to the story during moments of uncertainty. During the Renaissance, when Europe rediscovered classical texts, Atlantis symbolized knowledge waiting to be uncovered. In the age of exploration, it suggested that unknown lands might lie beyond the horizon. In modern times, it became a reminder that even the most advanced civilizations can disappear into silence. The legend endures because it touches a deeper human longing, the desire to believe that somewhere, hidden by time or water, a forgotten world once thrived. It speaks to the hope that traces of greatness may still rest beneath the waves, waiting for the right moment to return. Whether Atlantis was a memory, a metaphor, or a myth shaped by Plato's imagination, its story remains one of the most enduring mysteries ever recorded. It invites listeners to pause and consider how easily the line between history and legend can blur, and how stories, even when uncertain, can shape the way we understand our past. 5. The Samurai. The story of the samurai begins not with grand battles, but with the landscape of early Japan, where small clans guarded farmland, villages, and trade routes. These warriors were first protectors rather than noble figures. Over centuries, as regional lords known as daimyos gained influence, the samurai evolved into a distinct social class, shaped by loyalty, discipline, and duty. Their lives were built on a code later known as Bushido, a set of values that emphasized honor, courage, sincerity, and control of one's emotions. Although the code was not written in a single document, it grew naturally through centuries of conflict, peace, and spiritual thought. Samurai were not only fighters. Many were educated in literature, poetry, and philosophy. They practiced calligraphy, learned classical Chinese texts, and studied Zen Buddhism, which taught them to face uncertainty with calm acceptance. To a samurai, mastery of the sword was important, but mastery of the mind was considered equally essential. In a world where alliances shifted quickly, where messages traveled slowly, and where danger could arrive without warning, a steady mind was a valuable shield. In battle, the samurai used weapons far more varied than the katana often shown in stories. Earlier, warriors relied on the bow, and skilled horse archers were among the most respected fighters of the Heian and Kamakura eras. Armor changed over time as conflicts evolved, moving from lacquered plates tied with silk cords to heavier, more protective designs. But the true strength of the samurai did not lie in steel or horseback skill. It lay in their reputation for unwavering commitment to their lord. A promise once given was expected to be kept even at great personal cost. The rise of powerful families such as the Minamoto and the Taira pushed Japan into long periods of warfare. Through these conflicts, samurai gained political power and military governments known as shogunates emerged. The samurai became administrators and governors as well as warriors. They collected taxes, managed lands, and enforced laws. Their role in society deepened, but so did the expectations placed upon them. A moment of dishonor could stain a family for generations. In extreme cases, a samurai might choose ritual suicide, known as seppuku, to preserve dignity when facing disgrace. Although dramatic, these acts were rare and were governed by strict cultural rules. As firearms entered Japan in the 16th century through Portuguese traders, the battlefield changed. Muskets began to replace bows, and the sword became more symbolic than practical. Leaders, such as Oda Nobunaga and Tokugawa Ieyasu, reorganized armies around new technology. By the early 17th century, after centuries of conflict, Japan entered a long era of peace under Tokugawa rule. With few battles to fight, samurai adapted again, becoming scholars, teachers, and advisors. Their swords were still worn, but their daily duties involved administration and study rather than war. By the 19th century, outside pressure and internal reform pushed Japan toward modernization. The samurai class, once central to society, found its role diminishing. The new government abolished their privileges ended stipends, and encouraged modern military forces. Many former samurai adjusted to new roles in business, politics, and education. Others struggled to let go of a way of life that had shaped their families for hundreds of years. The era ended, but its cultural spirit remained deeply woven into Japanese identity. The legacy of the samurai continues not through weapons or armor, but through ideals of discipline, self-restraint, and integrity. Their story spans centuries of war and peace, rising and fallen empires, and dramatic transformation. Whether riding through mist-covered mountains or writing poetry by lamplight, the samurai lived by principles that valued action, guided by purpose. Their world no longer exists, yet the image of a calm, disciplined warrior endures as a reminder that strength is not found in force alone, but in character, shaped by devotion and responsibility. 6. The Lost City of Petra. Long before its red stone walls impressed travelers, Petra began as a settlement hidden among towering cliffs in what is now southern Jordan. The people who shaped it, the Nabateans, were skilled desert dwellers who understood the land better than any outsider. They lived at the crossroads of ancient trade, where caravans carrying incense, spices, silk, and precious metals moved between Arabia, Egypt, and the Mediterranean. Rather than rely on force, the Nabateans built their prosperity through diplomacy, engineering, and a deep knowledge of the desert's demands. Their mastery of water management allowed them to thrive where others could not. Through channels cut into stone and carefully placed dams and cisterns, they controlled the scarce rain, storing it for travelers and for themselves. This made Petra not only a safe haven, but a flourishing economic hub. The city's most famous structures, like the treasury, were not built in the traditional sense but carved downward from the rock face itself. The process required precision, planning, and generations of artisans who passed their skills from one to another. The treasury's facade, blending Hellenistic style with local elements, served not as a vault of wealth, but likely as a tomb for an important king. Beyond it lay a vast city, theaters carved from mountainsides, tombs lined along cliffs, temples rising from open courtyards, and streets once filled with merchants and travelers. Petra's architecture reflects a civilization that welcomed outside influences while still preserving its own identity. For centuries, Petra thrived as a center of trade. Caravans arrived daily, and the Nabateans grew wealthy from taxes and the exchange of goods. But the world around them changed. New sea routes reduced the importance of land caravans, and Rome, expanding its influence across the region, absorbed the Nabatean kingdom in the 1st century. Petra remained active, but its prominence slowly faded. Earthquakes damaged important structures, shifting political powers redirected commerce, and gradually the city fell into silence. Homes were abandoned, marketplaces emptied, and the intricate water channels that had once sustained the city were left unused. As centuries passed, Petra became a memory known mostly to local Bedouin communities who protected its location. To the outside world, it practically disappeared. Maps omitted it, stories grew faint, and it entered the realm of lost cities. In 1812, a Swiss explorer named Johann Ludwig Burckhardt, traveling in disguise, convinced local guides to take him to the site. When he emerged from the narrow sea queue and saw the treasury carved into the cliffs, he understood he had rediscovered something extraordinary. His account stirred interest across Europe, and soon archaeologists, travelers, and scholars began arriving to study the forgotten city. Today, Petra stands as a testament to human creativity and resilience. Its rose-colored stones reflect the light of dawn and dusk in shifting shades, revealing new details with each hour. Visitors walk the same narrow canyon that ancient caravans once passed through, footsteps echoing against walls shaped by centuries of wind. Though much of the city remains partially buried or eroded, the surviving structures offer a glimpse into the Nabateans' brilliance. Petra's story is not simply one of decline, but of endurance. Hidden for centuries, it returned to the world not as a ruin, but as a reminder that even in the harshest landscapes, human imagination can carve beauty into stone and leave behind a legacy that defies time. 7. The Silk Road. The Silk Road was never a single road nor a straight path drawn across maps. It was a vast web of routes stretching thousands of kilometers, linking China to Central Asia, Persia, the Middle East, and the Mediterranean. Long before it was given a name in the 19th century, it existed as a living network shaped by merchants, pilgrims, soldiers, and storytellers who traveled with hopes, goods, and news from distant lands. Its earliest foundations came during the Han Dynasty in China, when demand for silk reached far beyond the empire's borders. Silk was light, beautiful, and extremely valuable, making it the perfect material to carry across deserts and mountains. Caravans began their journey in the ancient city of Chang'an, moving westward through the Gansu corridor before reaching the unforgiven Taklamakan Desert. Travelers skirted its edges rather than attempt its deadly interior, choosing routes that clung to oases like Dunhuang or Khotan. These oases were more than water stops. They were cultural crossroads where languages mixed, goods exchanged hands, and news flowed like an invisible currency. From there, the network split into many branches. Some routes headed toward Samarkand, a city that would become one of the great jewels of Central Asia, while others continued toward Persia, eventually linking to ports on the Mediterranean Sea. Along these paths, traders carried silk, jade, spices, precious metals, glassware, and textiles. But material goods were only part of the exchange. Ideas traveled too. Buddhism spread from India into China, through monks who walked the same dusty tracks as merchants. Paper and printing techniques moved westward, changing the way people recorded knowledge. Astrology, mathematics, and medicine crossed borders in both directions. Even music traveled the Silk Road, with instruments and melodies blending into new forms. The network became a silent teacher, shaping civilizations without any single empire controlling it entirely. The journeys were long and dangerous. Caravans faced sandstorms, bandits, sickness, and months of harsh travel. Yet people continued, driven by profit, curiosity, or faith. In caravanserais, large inns built along the routes, travelers shared stories of faraway places, rumored fortunes, and kingdoms that few had seen with their own eyes. These nightly exchanges created a tapestry of human experience richer than the goods carried on any camel's back. Over the centuries, the Silk Road rose and faded with the fortunes of empires. When powerful dynasties controlled the regions, travel became safer and trade flourished. When warfare or instability spread, the routes quieted. The rise of maritime trade in the 15th century slowly reduced the importance of land routes. Ships could carry larger cargoes more quickly, and sea routes were easier to protect. By then, the Silk Road had already left a deep imprint on history. Its legacy is not measured in wealth alone, but in connection. The Silk Road taught that distant cultures could influence one another without losing their identities. It showed that curiosity can cross mountains and deserts, linking people who might otherwise never meet. Even though the caravans no longer travel the same paths, the spirit of the Silk Road continues in every exchange of ideas, every shared discovery, and every moment when cultures meet and find something familiar in one another. It remains a symbol of humanity's oldest desire, to explore, to learn, and to understand the world beyond the horizon. 8. Norse mythology. Norse mythology grew in the northern lands where winters were long, summers short, and the boundaries between survival and loss were always close. The people who told these stories lived in a world shaped by the sea, the mountains, and the cold, and their imagination formed a mythology that reflected both the harshness and the beauty of their environment. These tales were not written at first. They were spoken beside fires in the dark hours, carried from village to village, and shared by poets who remembered every detail. Only centuries later were they written down in Iceland, preserving a world that was already fading. In Norse cosmology, the universe began not with calm order, but with a meeting of fire and ice. From that collision rose the first being, and from him came giants and gods who would eventually shape the realms. The world was envisioned as a great tree called Yggdrasil, with branches and roots stretching into different domains. The gods lived in Asgard, a realm connected to the world of humans by a shimmering bridge. These gods, unlike the perfect deities of some traditions, were powerful yet flawed, wise yet vulnerable. They made mistakes, sought knowledge, and faced dangers that even they could not always overcome. Odin, often called the All-Father, was the seeker of wisdom. He sacrificed great things to obtain knowledge, giving up one of his eyes to drink from a well that held the secrets of the cosmos. His thirst for understanding showed that even the highest god was willing to endure pain for truth. Thor, his son, was the protector of gods and humans alike, carrying a hammer that returned to his hand after every strike. His battles were loud and fierce, yet he was also a symbol of stability in a world filled with unpredictable storms. Loki, neither purely loyal nor entirely traitorous, moved between roles. He was a shapeshifter whose cleverness often saved the gods, but his unpredictable nature also led to tragedy. The stories of these figures were not created to offer a peaceful vision of the world. Instead, they acknowledged uncertainty. They taught that strength alone could not solve every problem, and that even the bravest might face moments of doubt. They also taught that laughter, cleverness, and friendship existed alongside danger. Many tales blend humor with fear, showing that life was never one single emotion, but a shifting combination of many. Perhaps the most striking theme in Norse mythology is the idea of Ragnarok. It was not a distant threat, but a foreseeable event, a final battle in which gods and giants would clash, and the world as they knew it would end. Yet the mythology does not present this as pure despair. The gods continued to prepare, fully aware of what awaited them, because the value of courage was not in victory, but in standing strong even when the outcome was known. The Norse people understood that life brought both joy and hardship, and that dignity came from meeting fate with steady resolve. After Ragnarok, the stories tell of a world reborn. New life would emerge, children of our old gods would walk familiar paths, and the earth would grow green again. This vision softened the finality of destruction, offering a quiet hope that renewal always follows even the darkest moments. It mirrored the cycle of nature in the north, where winter could feel endless, yet spring inevitably returned. When these myths were finally written into the sagas and the Eddas, they captured more than battles and gods. They preserved a way of seeing the world. They showed a belief system rooted in the idea that existence is unpredictable, that knowledge has a price, and that courage is meaningful even when endings cannot be avoided. The gods were mirrors of the people who imagined them, resilient, imperfect, determined, and deeply connected to the land around them. Today, Norse mythology survives not just in books, but in modern culture, inspiring stories, films, and art. Yet the heart of these tales remains unchanged. They remind us that even in a world shaped by uncertainty, strength can be quiet, wisdom can be costly, and hope can rise even after everything else has fallen. The ancient poets who once spoke these stories into the cold northern air understood that myth was more than entertainment. It was a way to make sense of hardship, a way to honor bravery, and a way to imagine what lies beyond the storm. Ninth, Genghis Khan. The story of Genghis Khan begins not with an empire, but with a boy named Temujin, born on the cold grasslands of Mongolia in the 12th century. His early life was marked by hardship. When his father, a minor chieftain, was poisoned by rivals, Temujin's family was abandoned by their tribe and left to survive alone on the open steppe. They lived by gathering roots, trapping small animals, and moving constantly to avoid danger. These years taught Temujin the value of resilience, the importance of loyalty, and the reality that power could vanish in a single moment. As Temujin grew older, he began to rebuild what had been taken from him. The Mongol tribes were divided by feuds, each clan guarding its own interests. Temujin understood that unity required more than strength. It required fairness. He promoted people based on loyalty and ability rather than noble birth, an approach that drew followers who believed in his vision. Slowly, he formed alliances, settled disputes, and defeated rivals who sought to break him. His reputation spread across the steppe, a leader who rewarded courage, punished betrayal, and valued discipline above all. When he finally united the major tribes, he was given the title Genghis Khan, meaning universal ruler. Under his leadership, the Mongol army transformed into one of the most effective forces the world had ever seen. Their success came from training, strict organization, and the speed of their horses, which allowed them to move across vast distances with astonishing efficiency. They used coordinated strategies, arrows crafted for accuracy, and complex signals to control movements during battle. They adapted to every landscape they entered, whether desert, forest, or frozen plain. Genghis Khan's conquests reshaped Asia. His campaigns against northern China, the Khwarezm Empire, and regions across Central Asia were marked by both remarkable military precision and devastating destruction. Cities that resisted were often destroyed, while those that surrendered were spared and reorganized under Mongol law. Despite the violence of war, Genghis Khan introduced systems intended to stabilize the lands he conquered. He established a code known as the Yasa, which emphasized order, punishment for corruption, and protection for the poor. He encouraged communication through a relay system of riders that carried messages across thousands of kilometers. Trade routes flourished under Mongol protection, allowing merchants to move goods more safely than before. Yet the man behind the empire remained complex. He valued family deeply and relied on his sons and trusted generals to manage regions he could not reach. He was curious about different religions, inviting monks, imams, and scholars to speak freely in his presence. He believed in reward and consequence, but also in listening before making decisions. Though his campaigns brought suffering, they also connected distant cultures at a scale rarely seen before his time. Genghis Khan died in 1227 during a campaign in the West. The exact cause remains unknown. Historical records offer only fragments. His burial place, hidden according to tradition, has never been discovered. After his death, the empire expanded even further under his sons and grandsons, stretching from Korea to the edges of Europe, forming the largest land empire in world history. Over the centuries, perceptions of Genghis Khan shifted, shaped by the cultures he conquered and the legacies he left behind. Some saw him as a destructive conqueror, while others viewed him as a reformer who brought stability to regions torn by conflict. The truth lies somewhere between. He was a leader shaped by a harsh world, driven by ambition and vision, capable of both immense brutality and remarkable innovation. His story continues to echo across history, not only through the lands he ruled, but through the systems of trade, law, and communication that took form in the shadow of his empire. 10. The origins of Christmas traditions. The traditions of Christmas did not emerge from a single moment or culture. They developed slowly over centuries, shaped by winter rituals, religious observances, and the human desire to bring warmth into the coldest part of the year. Long before Christmas existed, people across Europe marked the winter solstice, the turning point when the days would finally begin to lengthen again. In northern regions, this was a time of bonfires, feasts, and gatherings meant to drive away darkness and remind communities that light would eventually return. These customs created an emotional foundation long before Christianity gave the season its religious meaning. When early Christian leaders selected the date for celebrating the birth of Jesus, they chose late December not because of historical certainty, but because this period already carried deep symbolic weight for many cultures. By placing Christmas near existing solstice festivals, they allowed older customs to blend naturally with new beliefs. Over time, the celebration grew into a mixture of religious reflection and seasonal tradition. People attended church services, shared meals, and exchanged small gifts as gestures of goodwill. The Christmas tree has its roots in northern Europe, where evergreen branches were used in winter ceremonies as symbols of life that survived the darkness. In the 16th century, decorated indoor trees appeared in German-speaking regions. Families placed candles, fruit, or simple ornaments on the branches as reminders of hope and renewal. These trees eventually spread across Europe and later to America, becoming one of the most recognizable features of the holiday. Gift giving also has multiple origins. In Christian tradition, it echoes the gifts brought by the Magi, but it is equally shaped by older customs of offering presents during winter festivals, gestures meant to strengthen community bonds. The figure associated with giving gifts changed over time as well. St. Nicholas, the historical bishop known for his generosity, influenced many European traditions. In some places, he arrived on the night of December 6th. In others, he worked alongside local folklore figures. When these traditions reached America, they blended into the modern image of Santa Claus. The custom of hanging stockings stems from the legend of St. Nicholas secretly helping a poor family by placing coins in their drying socks. Over centuries, the idea evolved into a playful tradition in which stockings are left open for small surprises. Meanwhile, the Christmas feast developed from both Christian celebration and much older winter gatherings, when families would cook richer meals to lift spirits and mark the end of the agricultural year. Even simple foods like gingerbread or spiced drinks connect back to medieval kitchens where spices were used to warm the body and offer comfort. Carols and seasonal music emerged as another layer of tradition. Medieval Europeans mixed religious stories with folk melodies, creating songs that could be sung in homes, streets, or churches. These carols traveled across borders, adapting to local languages and customs. They gave voice to the emotional atmosphere of the season, whether joyful, reflective, or quietly hopeful. As Christianity spread, each culture added its own touches. The British developed Christmas crackers and mince pies. The French used nativity scenes to depict the story of Jesus' birth. Scandinavians kept elements of their winter folklore, blending them into the holiday. The result was not a single unified tradition, but a tapestry woven from many threads, each representing a community's attempt to brighten the darkest weeks of the year. By the 19th century, writers, poets, and illustrators shaped the holiday into something closer to what we know today. Their works emphasized generosity, family, and the gentle spirit of the season. Christmas became not only a religious observance, but also a cultural moment that encouraged reflection, kindness, and connection. The origins of Christmas traditions reveal how deeply people have always longed for light, warmth, and companionship. Beneath the decorations and stories lies a simple truth. Every ritual, whether ancient or modern, exists to remind us that even in the coldest seasons, hope can grow and light will always return.